For the last 7 years, my dad has been calling me an idiot, stupid, ignorant in so many different ways because I invested in Bitcoin. And today I just got off the phone with him and he told me that he recently bought the ETF, IBIT, the BlackRock ETF for Bitcoin, and he's considering putting a good amount of his money into Bitcoin. So it brings me joy. Definitely, it's a mom- momentous occasion, And today I wanted to talk to you about Bitcoin, and this is not what actual Bitcoin is, but it's a physical representation based off the logo. But amazing little gift my girlfriend got me for Christmas. I wanted to talk to you about my journey in the last 7, 8 years. I've been in Bitcoin since 2017. And the first time I heard about Bitcoin was even before that. It was in like 2013, way long ago. And I was like playing Diablo 3. And I remember my friend sold some gear for like 2, 3 Bitcoin. And back in the day, it was like, I don't know the price, $40, $150. So he was able to make a couple $100 selling, digital goods in the form of a Diablo loot and gear for what now is several $100,000 worth of Bitcoin. So, I thought it was a fad. I thought it was just like some digital, token. I used to play Neopets. I used to buy online stuff like Magic the Gathering online. So I had an understanding of digital goods, but it didn't really click with me until the last couple years holding Bitcoin, investing in Bitcoin. And hindsight's 2020. Everyone that invested in Bitcoin in 2013, 2017, obviously, if they've held, it's looking like a genius right now because Bitcoin is on the cusp of changing the game, like changing what wealth creation and wealth preservation is all about. But let's kind of go through the timeline. First time I actually took Bitcoin seriously was back in 2017. I went to a mastermind, and it was around internet money. It was called the Internet Earner Summit by Jeremy Haynes. He hosted it. One of my mentors still. I'm in his mastermind currently. He helped blow up a ton of influencers. Grant Cardone, he took Grant Cardone from peanuts to doing multiple millions of dollars a year, a month even. So he took Grant Cardone from nobody to being one of the most influential internet figures out there. And he helped with Ty Lopez and Dan Locke. So you might know Jeremy, but that's besides the point. I was at this mastermind, and there was all these young hustlers, and I was probably around 27 at the time, and I had been successful with my first business. I started an iPhone computer repair business on campus. It was called Fix It in Champaign, Illinois, FYXIT. We came up with it before Lyft came out, I feel like. And, blew that up to do close to $1 million a year with my business partner, Andy. And it was good. Life was good. And I was at this mastermind, and all these young 18-year-olds, 22-year-olds making internet money, doing SMMA, social media management and marketing. They were talking about it like it was going to be the next big thing, right? It was probably it just like launched from like 2,000 to 4,000. And it was pretty hypey, and I was like, that's just a fad. It's gonna go away. Like all these other pump and dumps that I've seen. It was like my first time investing recently in the stock market as well. I had actually invested in biopharmaceuticals, and I took that from like a portfolio that was like around 50,000 to 80,000. I thought I was a genius because I made like 20, 30K in a span of like a couple months. And then boom, all of it was gone. I put a lot of money into, I don't know if you guys know this stock called Novavax, NVAX. And Bill Gates and his foundation had invested in it. I'm like, okay, this is a for sure thing. But if you don't know much about biopharmaceuticals, at each stage of like trials and the drug becoming potentially a product that goes to market, it's a binary event almost. It's like if it works, if the results are good, the stock shoots up. If it doesn't, the stock goes to nothing. And the stock literally went from like $7, $8 down to like $1.20, like that. And I thought my stop loss that I was like, oh, I'm going to just set a stop loss in case this starts going down was going to trigger. Yeah, it triggered after it dropped like 85, 90% in one day. So I was out a lot of money. My portfolio got slashed in half, probably more. I had lost more money than I had ever made in a year in that single moment. And, I had a good understanding of, like stocks, I thought, until you get humbled. And I think that's what you learn over the course of investing. You're not God. No one's God. No one's going to always beat the market. Even the most successful investors, they have their losses. You look at the people that are investing in Silicon Valley, they have, the ones that invest in the unicorn companies, the ones that are billion-dollar companies, they're cool with 9 out of 10 companies not working out. Like maybe one other company might hit like 50, 100, couple $100 million in valuation, but 8 or 9 out of every company does not work out. And I've invested in companies in Y Combinator. My friend's company got, millions of dollars of funding and it still didn't work out. And he's a genius. He went to Stanford, got his PhD, partnered with 2 other Stanford graduates, and they had a great idea and they had momentum. But, I think actually in entrepreneurship, that's a whole nother story. It's all about perseverance and being willing to pivot and making it happen, right? Like if you don't give up, you can't lose. If you're always willing to keep fighting, you fight to see another day. And the most successful entrepreneurs and agency owners that I know personally have that grit about them. Not to say that my friend doesn't have grit. They did grind it out for 2 years. With that being said, these crypto bros, these young hustlers at this mastermind were hyping it up, and I just kind of ignored it. And then I finally took the plunge. I was on a trip with my friend Bobby, who got me on Bitcoin. Bobby Carzoli, he worked at Innova, I believe is the name. It's like a company that works with financial instruments like subprime loans, stuff like that. And he was like, dude, Bitcoin's the future. Neo, like we missed out on Ethereum's pump. Like Neo's the next big thing. Neo is like the Chinese version of Ethereum. And I was like, all right, cool. Let's go. I'm a roll the dice. So I bought like, 5, 10K worth of Bitcoin, bought some Ethereum, bought some Neo, and Bitcoin started pumping, 10K, 12K. I look up one day and it's hitting its all-time highs, 17,000, getting close to 20,000. And I'm like, dude, I'm a genius. And I was just like, I'm going to get so rich. I'm still early on this. This is going to go to 1 million. It's been going to 1 million for a long time, right? That's always like the people that are pumping it, that are believers, believe it is one day going to be at 1 million. And now we have some experts, saying it might go to 13 million. So it sounds absurd because we're still early, right? 10 million to 13 million, that's like 130x. That's insane to me. That means if you put in 1 million right now or 100,000, you're going to get 13 million. Or no, if you put 1 million right now, you would get 130 million. If you put in 100,000, because it's roughly around 105, you would walk away with, 13 million. That's absolutely crazy, bonkers. Anyways, it went up and then it went down. If you guys have been following Bitcoin, my portfolio, I had Neo, like I took it from like 10K all the way to like, I think it was like 50K, 60K, and Bitcoin went up and I doubled and I almost tripled there. And I'm like, this is amazing. I'm making so much money, but you don't actually make money until you take it out. And I never really took it out. After everything crashed, after the first crypto winter that I experienced, I I was kind of like, oh shit, should I just sell and take my last couple $1,000s out? I literally went from like 70K all the way down to like, I believe when I consolidated all of my Bitcoin, um, it was just like, I consolidated everything, all the crypto. I just sold it and I sold it into Bitcoin because I'm like, all right, Bitcoin's not going anywhere. Who knows about these other little altcoins? And I had one whole Bitcoin actually. Actually, I think I had just shy of one Bitcoin. I had like zero point 0.7. I ended up topping off and buying another 0.3. And Bitcoin had a pretty terrible winter. It went all the way down to like 3,500. And at the time, during like 2018, I went on a trip with Andy, my business partner at Fix It, and my friend Colby, and we were hyping up, all the, coins, like Denta coin. It was just funny because some random dude in Thailand, we were on a trip, said Denta coin was going to go to the moon, and we were laughing about it still. Anyways, it's getting late, so I put on these blue light blockers. Anyways, Andy was, by the time it hit 3,500, Andy actually bought 2 Bitcoin on that trip. And by the time it hit 3,500, Andy's like, bro, that was the most expensive trip I've ever taken in my life. He went from putting in like, I think he bought like 2.5 Bitcoin or something, put in like 25,000, around like 10K. And that shit went to like 7,000. So he like lost 15K. The Thailand trip probably cost at most 2-3K. So cost them a lot. That was a very expensive vacation. Then 2020 rolled around, and something that I've learned investing in things over time is like, hey, if it's not going to go away, oftentimes it makes a comeback, right? Apple made a comeback. Amazon made a comeback. If it's like a really solid idea or company that is continually innovating and has a good foundational narrative, which Bitcoin has an amazing narrative, which we can discuss in a little bit, then chances are it's going to bounce back. That's what I believe. And I also learned about like supply and demand lines. Like when you look at stocks going up and down, usually when it like breaks all like previous all-time highs, it's going to keep running. And usually when like it hits like a bottom and it hits it again, it kind of bounces off that. So those are like, I think, one of the biggest technical indicators of price movement. And that's why, I invested very heavily recently and also back in 2020. 2020 was when I first made a really big investment into Bitcoin. I was told I'm not supposed to say how many Bitcoin I have or I invested in. But at the time, I put several tens of thousands of dollars into Bitcoin in 2020, right when it was starting to kind of, I think I should pull out a chart, but, we can edit one in, or you can kind of just pull up the Bitcoin chart. But it was hitting around 12, 13,000. And then the government was bailing everyone out and printing a shit ton of money with the COVID stimulus. And I'm like, dude, money's got to go somewhere, and it's going to go into Bitcoin, especially if they're like devaluing the dollar by printing more, with quantitative easements is what they call it, or, stimulus. And, I was pretty lucky. I timed it quite well. It was still kind of at the bottom. I think Bitcoin, the lowest it was that year was like 7K. And I went all in. I bought multiple Bitcoin, and I got lucky. I turned this into a pretty penny. And Bitcoin started running. It hit 20K. Everyone's like, bro, you got in that early? And I'm like, yeah, shit. I guess I got lucky. And there was mania, right? So much stimulus, so many stocks blowing up. Tesla going from, 400 to $3,000, $4,000 like pre-split. Right now, it literally went from like $40 the current price to like $400, right? So I also invested in Tesla at the time. Really believed in what Elon was doing, him landing rockets, flying to space, solving for a huge problem, electric vehicles, energy. And so I got lucky, and then mania struck, and I thought I was a genius, and I kept just putting money in, and I never took any profits. But, I always told myself I'm a long-term investor. I also saw what MicroStrategy was doing, was following MicroStrategy for a while, and I had 2,000 shares of MicroStrategy at one point. And I had to sell it because everything was going down, and if I didn't, I was on margin, and I was going to get margin called, which, for those who don't know what margin is, it's when you borrow against like your equity. You have $1 million, let's say, of like stock, and you're able to buy $2 million worth of stock by borrowing against the 1 million. So I had a little bit of margin at the time. And then things just kept going down, down, down. And my dad actually, at the peak, when I visited home at like 70,000, he's just like, hey, this is a bubble. You're going to lose all your money. You should sell it. I'll make you a bet, a friendly bet that, like if you sell it and it goes down, I forget the exact terms, but he was going to like even give me some money. And I'm like, nah, I'd rather hold it and take it to the moon, take it to a million. And then the cascading events of Three Arrows Capital and BlockFi and FTX. I had a lot of money in BlockFi, and they promised like some interest on my Bitcoin. I'm like, hey, if I'm gonna hold this Bitcoin, I might as well get some interest on it. But usually, like there's always risk when you like give another entity custody of your Bitcoin. We should all know by now, if it's not your keys, if you don't own the actual keys to your Bitcoin, then it's not your keys, not your crypto, right? So you don't actually own it. And I gave it to BlockFi to hold on to for that interest. I didn't go as crazy as like the guaranteed returns from crypto mining, because a lot of crypto mining companies blew up. They guaranteed like these crazy returns and yield. And I know a lot of people that lost a lot of money. If it's too good to be true, often it comes with said risk, right? If you're going to double your money, yeah, there's probably like 5 times the risk, because the average return that you get from the market is around anywhere between 8 to 13% from, the stock market or real estate. Those are like pretty normal, good, predictable returns. Any less means it's safer. From like the bank, you might get 3 to 5%, and then from bonds you might get 5%, and anything higher than that, like there's risks from whoever is promising you these higher returns. So like if you let someone borrow money for a real estate project, who knows, the real estate project might blow up literally, and you're out of the money, and the 20, 30% that you said you were going to get, or you thought you were going to get. And happened to my friends, like a lot of them, their real estate projects blew up. They thought they were going to make $1 million. They almost went bankrupt. Anyways, when BlockFi crashed, I got lucky. And I didn't know at the time, but a couple days before, this FTX fiasco with Sam Bankman-Fried, I saw some warning signs. I followed some people on Instagram, and my friend also texted me, dude, are you seeing this stuff? You might want to get your money out. And I didn't believe it at first. I'm like, FTX is way too big to fail, right? Like everyone thinks that, if it's like a multiple billion dollar company, it's like, it's not going anywhere. But, I think we've all been mistaken. Blockbuster, Nokia, BlackBerry, all of these big companies in the past, Yahoo, AOL, have all gone bust, even though they had so many financial resources. So I was just like, hey, I'm chilling, and then 2 days later, my best friend called me, and he's like, "Bro, just move it. Make sure you have it." And so I transferred it from the BlockFi interest or BlockFi like interest bearing account to the BlockFi like wallet. And that meant like I actually like based off their terms, I owned the Bitcoin and I transferred it out. And I moved out all of that money, or transferred not money, the Bitcoin to a wallet, and I had to do some KYC and some like verifications, and I waited. FTX, the news announced, BlockFi, said no more transfers. I had transferred it Wednesday, and Friday came around and said we're halting all transfers and withdrawals. Everyone's just gonna have to wait until we figure out what's going on. And my Bitcoin was not transferred out, and I thought Bitcoin transferred out in 30 minutes, 1 hour, potentially a couple hours if there's congestion with the network at the time. And I never saw it. And then fast forward 2 weeks later, I'm in the taxi with my friends, and I'm like checking my wallet, and I'm like, my Bitcoin transferred. So I guess I was like one of the last people out of BlockFi. Got really lucky. Very thankful for Eric, my friend, for warning me, as well as getting other signals from people and social media. But during that time, I thought I lost all my Bitcoin, and so I ended up it's just like maybe this is one big scam. Maybe it's just a house of cards. But that was the bottom, and I regretfully sold at the bottom. Like I sold almost one entire Bitcoin at 16,800, like literally the bottom. I think it maybe went to like 16,500 or something like that, right? And so looking back, that's one of my biggest regrets. But moving forward, right, I held the Bitcoin I got back, just didn't look at it, focused on my business. I think the best thing you can do if you've lost a lot of money is to focus on things you can control. Don't try to make it back on a crazy bet, but work on your business, work on your career, make that predictable money, get that stability so you're not mentally dependent on the price action. Because for a long time, I took a portfolio to 7 figures from just like $250,000, and it was like a huge dopamine hit every day. Some days I bought some options, and then 1 week later it would be up like 50,000, and I'm like, I'm a fucking genius. But everyone's making money, right? Everyone's making money in a gold rush or in a bull market. Everyone's a genius until the tide comes. The tide rolls out and you see who was swimming naked, right, is the saying. So a lot of boats got beached. A lot of whales got beached because they were over leveraged. And I was at the time too, because I took that portfolio from $250,000 or well over $1 million to all the way down to, less than where I started, almost getting margin called. I had to sell some Tesla stock even because I had borrowed up some money against it. And it was not much at the time. Anyways, I held, got my Bitcoin back and held for the next couple years. 2023, it started shaping up, and I'm like, oh shit, the market's bouncing back. I bought some altcoins. But altcoins, altcoins are usually a gamble. Think about altcoins as betting on a random company on the stock market. It can go up, it can go down, it can go nowhere. You can get rich. Bitcoin is, in my opinion, the aggregate value of all crypto capital, anything that's digital value is going to flow to Bitcoin over time, and it already is, and it already has, and improving so. And we can go talk a little bit more about the technicals, in my opinion, after that and why. So Bitcoin, it felt different this time around, and it's kind of crazy because if you look at the charts, Bitcoin does follow this pattern of like, you know, um, of like greed and of fear, of exuberance, and like mania, as well as like just like max fear, and it's just following that cycle because Bitcoin's controlled by humans in terms of like what they're willing to invest. And when humans usually overreact, is what I've seen, and so that's why you get these crazy swings on Bitcoin. Going up, multiple 100% and going down, 70% sometimes at a time. But what you have to realize is like if you kind of zoom out and you like kind of average out the returns, Bitcoin's been compounding at like well over 30% year over year for the last close to like 15 or so years now. And so when in doubt, zoom out. That's another important concept when it comes to investing. Anyways, 2024 was a great year. ETFs launched. That means that, big companies and people that had a lot of money that didn't want to touch this obscure Bitcoin through Coinbase were able to invest in their normal like brokerage accounts and just buy the ETF, buy BlackRock, which is one of the biggest funds out there. So it's pretty cool to see, and I wish I bought more at the time. And I was like, yeah, it's gonna go up, and I just held what I had. And then I'm like, no, it's gonna go up. Like people want this. A lot of cash was flowing in, and so I had FOMO. I actually always buy at the top usually, that because as smart as I am, I'm also human, and so that's what you have to understand. But if you zoom out, once again, it's not buying at the top. If you look 5, 10 years from now and you're compounding potentially 20 to 30% year over year, even with the swings, if you're willing to hold and you don't need the cash, then it absolutely makes sense as a vehicle that is going to get you outsized returns compared to the stock market getting you maybe 8 to 13% and banks getting you 0% sometimes, and negative percentages if you look at inflation and all the money printing and the dollar losing its value over time. Like the dollar has lost 97%, 98% of its value in the last 100+ years, right? Like in the past, you could buy a horse for like $50 and a car for like $3,000. Now it's 10x the price. So understanding some of these basic concepts will ideally help you make a decision to want to invest in Bitcoin. And also, another like anecdote is like the Bitcoin has proven itself, right? And it's proven itself over time. It's never been hacked. No one's ever like being able to create fake Bitcoin. It's based off cryptography and stuff that's outside of my understanding, but I'm sure like a lot of experts have well researched and people, if they can crack it, they would have already, because there's billions of dollars they can extract in value. They've only cracked like centralized exchanges, that have passwords, that have like data. They can just steal the data, by hacking into computers. But actual Bitcoin, the blockchain, has not been cracked. And so why was 2024 so good? ETFs for sure, and then I like a lot of the investors in the last year and a half have been larger institutional investors. We're talking about like pension funds, Wisconsin's pension fund, governments like El Salvador, as well as some big players like Tesla. Bought it back in I believe 2021, and like that's the reason why like Bitcoin is really not going anywhere. There's more and more big players. The supply is capped at 21,000. There's been probably 1 million plus lost coins. The supply is fixed and the demand keeps going up. And there's still so many people that aren't on Bitcoin and see it as a fad or thought it was like just something a couple years ago. Like the Google search volume is pretty friggin' low still compared to like well, maybe it's higher now, but like at least in 2024, where the price action was quite nice. It did a nice 2x or more than that. So I actually ended up buying a lot of Bitcoin at 70K when it first hit 70K again. I'm like, oh, it's going to break through. You know, like once it breaks 70K, it's going to keep going. And it broke 70K for a second. And then it went down to 50, up to 65, down to 70. And you can actually see like the price action like wedging, which means like supply and demand is like fighting against each other. And usually when that happens, if you guys follow technical analysis, it's going to break out one way or the other. And based off like just where the economy was going and how like AI was coming out and there was just more money flowing around again, you know, and things were starting to warm up, I felt like it was going to break up. So I did put a lot of capital in between $50,000 and $70,000, like like all the money I made last year. So why is 2025 and beyond going to be amazing for Bitcoin, and why I just bought another nice chunk of Bitcoin at the top, literally at 105,000. I bought a really significant, you know, like it's almost a salary, you know, I bought a lot. So one, Trump, you know, Trump's pro crypto, like, if you guys aren't following the news, like he's literally at the Bitcoin conference saying how he's going to blow crypto up, and Bitcoin's, you know, something that he wants to get behind. Recently on the news, he said he wants to make America the crypto, the Bitcoin, and AI capital of the world. You have big companies like Microsoft looking at putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet because they're holding like $70 billion of cash. So even if they put like, let's just say like 5% allocation, that's still 3.5 billion. That's going to drive that price up. And every other company is going to follow suit, right? Like I know Tesla did a good job leading the pack. Big companies like Microsoft investing, a lot of smart companies and CEOs are going to be like, yeah, we probably should just put like a couple percentages there just in case. We have states looking at putting Bitcoin as part of their strategic reserve. We got the whole country, you know, United States wanting to potentially establish a strategic reserve led by the Trump administration and the people that he's putting in power. Senator Lummis as like this crypto, you know, digital assets, like I don't know the exact name, but like chairman. And there's just so much like amazing upside for if all of this goes through. Like if the US does put it as a strategic reserve, just think about how many other countries are going to follow suit. And right now, how many countries are trying to front run the US? Because if the US buys what they say they might, which is 1 million Bitcoin, there's going to be a supply shock, which means supply's fixed. There's no more Bitcoin. More and more demand comes in. If you guys take in economics 101, if supply is, you know, like fixed and demand comes rushing in, there's only one way the result's gonna, you know, like there's only one way like that's gonna play out. The Bitcoin's gonna go to the moon. And so if the US does put it in as a strategic reserve and buy, you know, even buys a little bit, every other country is going to want to do it. Every company is going to want to do it that has half a brain. And that's why, you know, you should be buying the top, because if the US does that, most very well established investors and analysts see Bitcoin hitting 300, 500 easily. And that's a 3 to 5x on something that's already, you know, gone up a lot. But, you know, like what are the risks? Like I don't know if I'll be responding to everyone, but if you want to post in the comments, you know, about your experience with Bitcoin and what you think the risks are still. And, you know, if you're bullish, you know, Bitcoin to the moon. I would like to know. I really would like to know. And the last thing I want to leave you with is like making money, preserving your wealth. It isn't hard. It's actually quite boring. The easiest way to make money sometimes is the hardest way to make money because most people are impatient. They're itchy. They want to like look at their charts and like, oh, I made 5,000 today. Oh, I lost 8,000. Oh, I should sell. Don't do that. If you want to invest, like zoom out, look long term, look at successful companies like Apple and Amazon. Amazon during the dot-com boom hit like $120, and then it went all the way down to $5, and then it went up to $4,000, and this is all pre-split prices. But like Amazon was a great idea, a great concept, great execution, and it wasn't gonna go anywhere. And that's kind of how you have to look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin's narrative is so strong. It's a decentralized, cryptographic, backed by technology and computers and tons of science. It's not going anywhere. And if you look at that narrative of like what it's doing and how it's solving for some of the bigger problems, like governments printing money to oblivion, to the point where our deficits, multiple times our GDP, and you have some countries like literally like hyperinflation and their currency being like completely worthless. I was in Argentina and I literally had to trade for their currency, and their largest currency denomination was $2. And I got a stack of like their currency and steak at a nice steakhouse was like $40 a year prior, and when I went, it was like $10 for like a really nice steak and a $5 for a really nice Malbec glass of wine that would in the U.S. would cost over $100. But that's what happens when the government mismanages, their money. And so Bitcoin solves for a lot of this. And the best part about Bitcoin is that, it's the most valuable currency in my opinion, because you can move it around 24/7. There's always a market that's going on for it. You can buy it, sell it 24/7. You can't do that with stocks yet. If you do after hours, yeah, you can, but there's like way less volume of activity. And because there's way less volume, it means it's more illiquid, and which means Bitcoin is the most liquid asset. You can bring it across borders, across different countries super easily. Like you can't move $1 million to another country without having to talk to your bank. I recently did like a $220 transaction with a videographer I hired in Bogota. And just because I misclicked a button or I like put in the wrong password, my bank like locked me out and said, oh, we thought there was fraud. And I'm like, bro, just like FaceTime me or something, or like Face ID me. Like, it's not fraud. Let me transfer this money. And it took me an hour to get a $220 ACH transfer approved. It's ridiculous, right? And they said, oh, you got to just try it again in 30 minutes, an hour. And I'm just like, you're going to waste this much of my time for this little money? Like, and there's no other easy way to go about it. You would not fall into that issue with Bitcoin. I think the biggest issue with Bitcoin for me is potentially forgetting my keys and forgetting, how to access my Bitcoin. So I'm definitely looking into more safeguards and ways to always have, access and not lose it. But there's always risks if you like bury too many treasure chests with your coin, with your keys to your Bitcoin, or you tell too many people, or you write it down somewhere where you shouldn't. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge. Whoever can solve for that in a very strategic way, that just makes sense. I know you can you can put Bitcoin in custody with banks now. That's also a huge thing. Banks, now can hold or help you take custody of Bitcoin, which means there's just more money flowing into Bitcoin because banks can hold on to it for like old people that don't want to fuck with like having to manage it themselves. And on top of that, the best thing is, and I know there's a lot of good things, the best thing is you can borrow against it as well. In the past, the only way to make money on Bitcoin is to sell it, right? If you needed the money, if you needed to get cash out of Bitcoin, you would have to sell it. But now there's so many institutions and so many vehicles set up that you can borrow against it. And that's a beautiful thing. One is if you borrow against Bitcoin, you can literally, if you have $1 million of Bitcoin, you can take out a $300,000 loan, kind of like a home line of credit, whatever that's called. So you can borrow against it for pretty like reasonable interest rates. We're talking about 7%, 9%, 10%, 12%. So being able to access capital, you already know all the richest, most wealthy people, they don't sell their stock. They just borrow against their stock, and their stock keeps going up. And so that's how rich people keep getting richer. So anyways, if you enjoyed this video, it's one of the first ones I've done ever, on Bitcoin. And hopefully you got to understand like how I've approached Bitcoin and what my story is about Bitcoin and how I've learned to just do the hard thing, which is nothing at all, right? Which is actually quite easy. So once you learn that concept that you just need to buy and hold, just like if you bought and held Apple stock or Facebook stock or Amazon stock for the last 10 years, you would be way further ahead. And Bitcoin has the most simple yet powerful narratives of being the best store of value, being something that everyone is wanting to potentially front run the US on and invest in it before the US does. And just so much more, everything I talked about. Hopefully you buy Bitcoin and you're able to preserve your wealth, because I can tell you that, more likely than not, I believe this is the statistic is like most companies last less than 13 years. Maybe some of the companies on the, like the S&P 500 will last longer, but most companies die. You can invest in an index fund and get 8 to 13% returns year over year, or you can invest in Bitcoin. It's a little bit more volatile, in my opinion, a little bit more fun for me because I'm an entrepreneur. And you can get, let's just say, like probably 20 to 30% returns year over year if you're just willing to hold through the volatility. It can go up to 200, it can go down to 70. I believe the upside is way higher. It's way more likely, in my opinion, to go to 2, 3, 500 than it is to go to 50,000, which means like, if you look at expected value, it's quite high. It's a good bet. And in life, it's all about making good bets and sometimes very simple ones. So hope you enjoyed this little monologue, and we'll see you on the next one.